Hello everyone, what's up? Today we will listen a motivational story, The Clock That Never Stopped. The story will help you to improve your listening, reading, and speaking skills. So, let's start it. The clock had been hanging on the pale green wall of the old repair shop for longer than anyone in the neighborhood could remember. Its wooden frame was darkened by age, scratched by careless hands, and polished smooth in places where fingers had touched it absent-mindedly over the years. The glass was slightly cloudy, like tired eyes that had seen too much. Every second, the clock's thin black hand moved forward with a steady, unhurried confidence. Tick, tick, tick. It never rushed. It never hesitated. It simply continued. The repair shop stood at the corner of a narrow street where the city seemed to slow down. Buses roared past the main road 2 blocks away, and glass buildings reflected the sun like mirrors. But here, the air felt older. The shop smelled of oil, metal, and dust, a smell that settled deep into the wood of the shelves and the cracks of the floor. Watches lay open on small trays, their tiny gears exposed like fragile secrets. Old radios, clocks, and mechanical devices waited patiently for hands that could bring them back to life. Ethan had grown up inside this shop. As a child, he used to sit on a wooden stool near the counter, his legs swinging back and forth while his grandfather worked. He remembered the sound of tiny screwdrivers clicking against metal, the careful breathing of an old man concentrating, and the soft ticking that filled the room like a heartbeat. Time had always been present there, not as something to chase, but as something to listen to. His grandfather, Samuel, was a man of few words. His hair had turned white long before Ethan was born, and his back had slowly curved into a gentle bend, as if bowing respectfully to the years he had lived. When customers came in, Samuel greeted them with a nod and a quiet smile. He never rushed, even when the shop was full. He would pick up a watch, examine it closely, and say, "It will take some time," in a calm voice that made people trust him instantly. Ethan used to ask endless questions. Why does this clock tick louder than that one? How does the spring make the hands move? Why can't time go backward? Samuel rarely answered directly. Instead, he would hand Ethan a tool or point to a part and say, "Look closely," or "Listen." Over time, Ethan learned that understanding came not from quick answers, but from patience. Years passed, and the city around the shop changed. Old houses were replaced by tall buildings, small stores closed, and bright signs appeared. People began wearing smartwatches and checking their phones for the time. Fewer customers came to the repair shop. Some days no one came at all. Still, the clock on the wall continued at steady rhythm, filling the quiet space. When Samuel died, the shop felt unbearably silent, even though the ticking never stopped. Ethan was 23 then, standing alone behind the counter, surrounded by memories. He had left the city once, chasing something undefined, something that felt urgent and important. He studied business for a while, worked at offices where the lights were always bright and the days blurred together. People talked about deadlines, profits, and growth. They spoke fast, moved fast, and seemed constantly afraid of falling behind. At first, Ethan tried to keep up. He bought new clothes, learned new words, and stared at screens for hours. But something inside him always felt out of place. The ticking of clocks in office walls sounded harsh and impatient, like a warning rather than a companion. He told himself it was normal to feel that way, that everyone felt tired, that success required sacrifice. When the call came about his grandfather's death, Ethan returned to the old neighborhood with a heavy heart. He expected to feel relief at escaping the office life, but instead he felt lost. The shop was exactly as he remembered it, Yet it felt smaller without Samuel's presence. The tools were neatly arranged, the watches carefully stored, and the clock on the wall ticking, as always. For weeks, Ethan didn't know what to do. Friends encouraged him to sell the shop. Developers were buying properties nearby, offering money that sounded tempting. "This place is outdated," one friend said. "No one repairs watches anymore." Ethan nodded, unsure. At night, he sat alone in the shop, listening to the ticking. It was softer than he remembered, or maybe he was listening more closely now. One evening, as rain tapped against the window, a woman entered the shop holding a small box. She looked around as if she had stepped into another time. "Is this place still open?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I think so." She smiled and placed the box on the counter. Inside was an old pocket watch, its surface scratched and dull. "It belonged to my father," she said. "It stopped years ago, but I can't throw it away." Ethan picked it up carefully. He felt the familiar weight in his hand, the quiet potential hidden inside. Without thinking, he opened it and examined the gears. They were worn but intact. "It will take some time," he said, hearing his grandfather's voice in his own. The woman's expression softened. "That's fine," she said. "I've waited this long." After she left, Ethan worked late into the night. His movements were clumsy at first, his hands unsure, but slowly muscle memory returned. He cleaned the parts, adjusted the spring, and put everything back together. When he finally closed the watch and heard it tick, a strange warmth filled his chest. It wasn't pride exactly, but something deeper, something steady. Word spread slowly. A man came in with an old wall clock. A teenager brought a broken watch that belonged to his grandmother. Each time, Ethan found himself saying the same words, "It will take some time," and each time the customers nodded, as if those words carried reassurance.
The shop began to feel alive again, not busy but purposeful. The ticking from different clocks blended into a gentle rhythm. The clock on the wall continued its endless movement, watching silently. Outside, the city continued to rush. New buildings rose and people hurried past the shop without noticing it. Sometimes Ethan felt a pang of doubt. He wondered if he was wasting his potential, if he should be doing more, earning more, becoming someone more impressive. These bouts often came late at night, when the shop was quiet and the city lights flickered through the window. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan stared at the clock on the wall. He realized he had never questioned it. It had always been there, always working. He stood up, took a ladder, and climbed carefully until he was level with it. Up close, he saw the fine cracks in the wood, the tiny imperfections in the paint. He opened the back panel and examined the mechanism. It was old, older than any other clock in the shop. Some parts were clearly handmade. Others had been replaced over time, adjusted, repaired, and cared for. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. It had adapted piece by piece to keep going. As he listened to it tick, Ethan thought about his grandfather. He wondered how many times Samuel had stood here, making small adjustments, ensuring the clock would continue. It struck him that the clock didn't measure success or failure. It simply measured moments, one after another, without judgment. The next morning, Ethan made a decision that felt less like a dramatic choice and more like a quiet acceptance. He stopped comparing his life to others. He stopped imagining alternative paths that existed only in his mind. Instead, he focused on the work in front of him, on the small, precise movements of his hands, on the steady ticking that filled the shop. Seasons changed. Sunlight shifted its angle through the window. Dust settled and was wiped away. Ethan grew more confident, his hands more skilled. He repaired not just watches and clocks, but music boxes, old cameras, and anything with a mechanical heart. People began to come not just for repairs, but to talk. They shared stories while waiting, their voices low and reflective. An elderly man came in every Tuesday just to sit and listen. A young couple brought in a clock they wanted to hang in their new home. A child stared at the moving gears with wide eyes, just as Ethan once had. Sometimes Ethan would hand the child a small screwdriver and say, "Look closely." There were still difficult days. Some repairs failed. Some customers never returned. Money was often tight, but through it all, the clock on the wall continued. Its ticking did not grow louder in panic or softer in despair. It remained constant. Years later, Ethan noticed lines forming at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. His hair darkened less than it once had. He no longer thought of time as something slipping away. Instead, it felt like something unfolding, moment by moment, like the gears inside a watch turning together to create movement. One afternoon, as golden light filled the shop, Ethan received a letter from an old friend who had once urged him to sell. The friend wrote about exhaustion, about the pressure to always move faster, about the fear of stopping. Ethan folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. He glanced at the clock and listened. Tick, tick, tick. The sound felt like a reminder that movement did not always mean speed, and progress did not always look impressive from the outside. The clock did not know the future, and it did not regret the past. It simply continued, carrying every second forward. As evening approached, Ethan closed the shop and stood for a moment before turning off the lights. In the dimness, the clock's hands were still visible, moving steadily. He felt a quiet gratitude, not for success or recognition, but for continuity. Outside, the city lights flickered and cars rushed by, chasing destinations and deadlines. Inside the shop, time moved at its own pace. The clock on the wall kept ticking, just as it always had, and just as it always would, measuring not the speed of life, but its presence.
Thank you for listening to the story. To get more story like this to improve your English skill, please subscribe this channel, Story Learn English.